We're live. Brent, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Um, CrossFit and now model, I see in the John magazine the other day.
Yeah. So those photos were taken back in, I think it was May. So we've been kind of sitting on them, waiting for it to be released. And yeah, a bit of fun. Everyone saw it, which is kind of cool. Wanted to give the fans a little something different for me to do, but likely not replacing the the CrossFit as my main source of focus. That's for sure.
Not just yet. All right, all right.
Yeah.
I want to talk a bit about your background and so on, but I thought we might start with your nickname is the Professor. Could you tell us where
Yeah.
that came from?
So you said it correctly. So that's how they said it in Australia when they gave it to me, where they kind of just got rid of the R at the end. And switch it out for an A. Yeah, that's where I got it. It was a nickname given to me by the folks at CrossFit Broad Beach, and like my first coach, Drew Griffith. And it was just kind of a nickname, like, I was always breaking things down and thinking about things, like how many reps per minute, and how long should my rests be, and that sort of thing, and just kind of like nerding out really. And I was going to school to be an accountant, and so it's just kind of like, it was almost, yeah, it'd be like calling me like the nerd, or the thinking man, or whatever it is. And so yeah, it just kind of stuck, and that was back in 2012, and it stuck with me, which definitely worse nickname, so I'm all right with it.
All right, I won't use this next half hour or whatever to convince you to do a HYROX, but like the stats you get from HYROX, like I think you'd love, like the breakdown of times by station and the overall race and compare against people all over the world. This is one of the things that I love actually.
Yes, I agree. Like I'm pretty familiar with HYROX. Like I know that the winning times are around that hour. How you run 10K, or is it eight total?
Eight total, yeah.
Eight. Yeah, so you run 8K, and then it's eight stations, right?
Yes, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So it's a K and then a station. Yeah. And so I think if I had gun to my head, I think I'd be able to guess six of the stations. And I know that they have the times per station, and there's rules, and it's consistent, and that's great. I wish that what I mean. I'd love for CrossFit to adopt a little bit more of that consistency in how they run competitions. I think it'd be great for. So let me put it this way: for me, I don't really care, because like I found success in the model that exists in CrossFit, and I can thrive and exist and compete against people of my skill level in the model that exists, right? So I can go against the best in the world because I'm one of the best in the world. So it's great. For everyone kind of below me, there really isn't like a structure and a sport and a way that you can compare yourself. Whereas if you compare it to other, like really, if you're competing in CrossFit, you're sort of competing against HYROX, you're competing against triathlons, maybe powerlifting, Olympic weightlifting. And a lot of people love CrossFit and they get into it. And then after a year or two or three, they kind of move on to one of those other ones because you can measure yourself. You're like, oh, my triathlon time got better. My HYROX time got better. My Olympic lifting total went up. And so you can sort of see that progress where it can be tough in CrossFit. You can train your butt off all year. And then your only measuring stick sometimes is the open. And you finish worse in the open because the workouts change so dramatically. And so it can take a really mature person to know that they still got better. But if you're training to compete, it can be super frustrating when you're like, I'm not seeing the fruits of my labor translate to competition success because there's not as many opportunities to compete, and then the competitions can be so diverse in how they're programmed. So I like what HYROX has done and like standardized it. I think it's something that CrossFit could have done a long time ago, but then what's the expression? The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, and the next best time is today. So I
Yeah.
still think there's plenty of opportunity for them to standardize some things. I think we still need that unknown and unknowable, but yeah, there's a little too much, and I think even the diehard Kool-Aid drinking like frothers that just love CrossFit no matter what are starting to feel that way too. You see it with people that would have never said that 5 years ago, are starting to be like, well, maybe there should be like a something that's a little more consistent. So I really like what HYROX is doing. I like that they're making moves. It's good. It's good to see.
I said to you, we spoke to Sam Briggs last week, and I got thinking about that because there was, one of the games she didn't qualify for, essentially because like there were handstand walks in the semis or the
Yes.
regionals or whatever it was. And yeah,
And it was poorly programmed too that year. So what it was is if you fell once, that was your distance. So it was like it'd be the equivalent of doing a snatch, a one rep max snatch. You get one attempt,
yeah,
and you either get So let's say I would go, oh, I'm going to do, I don't know, 275, even though my PR is like 300, 305, And then it's like, so I'm going to do something pretty conservative. And then if I miss it, it's like, you just get 0 points. So it's like, what are we doing? You need at least 2 or 3 or 4 attempts to kind of like, let's see who's strong. And so with the handstand, it was just 1 attempt. And so for her, she kind of, fell. And then it's like, oh, there's her whole season. She won the year before, and she would have done very well that year based on the programming at the games. So it's like, that's a great example of like, what are we doing? Like if we can't get the reigning champion back because of like a huge oversight and a stupid decision in programming, like, what are we doing? Like what is this proving? What is this whole thing about? Right. And it's still, even this year, Travis Mayer, he had a wrist injury during the Open, and he hasn't won the games, but he's like consistently a solid games athlete. And it's like, oh, he just had an injury at this one competition, or maybe, food poisoning one weekend, or maybe, yeah. So it's just like little things like that. Lots of room for improvement. For
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. If we just shift, talk about your background a little, like you've obviously shown a huge amount of longevity in CrossFit. Do you feel like there's anything in your background, physically or mentally, that has helped you get to that point where you are today, that perhaps someone could take something from?
Yeah, like a longevity standpoint, or just being successful in general?
Just being successful in general, really, is what I was thinking.
Yeah, I think I just kind of always stay hungry, I guess. Like I feel like I'm every day just trying to maximize the time I have in a day and plan a week ahead, 2 weeks ahead. I mean, obviously more than that, a year, but um it's really like, it's hard because I think something I've learned in the last little while is there are certain things for me that are habits that are non-negotiable, that for other people would be like massive shifts in their perspective and how they live their life. So, someone's like, oh, like, how do you build up the motivation to train by yourself every day? Because I train in my garage gym, like, basically by like, since the games, I think all of my sessions have been in this gym essentially by myself. I guess I went on a trip to Denver for a photo shoot for Ascent Protein. And when I was there, I did one session with a guy. He like did the workout with me. Like we did the runs and the burpees together. And so, for some people, they're like, how do you do that? Like what, and for me, that's not really like it's just such an ingrained habit, because it's like, well, I got up every morning, delivered my papers, and then biked to swimming practice when I was 12 years old, or, 10 years old. And every afternoon after school, I would have volleyball practice, and you didn't miss it. Right. Like there wasn't an option at the time, especially if your parents are paying for it or whatever. But they even told me recently, they're like, oh, if you and your sister had ever complained, we would have stopped taking you. Like, oh, I don't want to go, but we wanted to go. And so obviously at the time that was with the team, or it was an individual sport in swimming, but it was a team training atmosphere, but like we wanted to go. And so even now it's like, are there days I don't want to train? Yeah, every day. But it's just a habit. And so it's like, if you read the book Atomic Habits, it's probably like, if you want to, well, how do I get the habit, Brent? It's like, read that book, Atomic Habits by James Clear, and just do something in there. Find something that resonates with you. And so, yeah, I think it's like, it's about habit creation, and like, it's more about dedication than it is about, what's the opposite word of that? Like motivation. Oh, how do you stay motivated? I'm like, I'm not really motivated. I mean, most days I don't want to train. It's like, oh, I'd rather just like, I like cleaning. I like, like tidying the house, like organizing things. I'd love to just sit on my computer and like fill out spreadsheets and stuff. Like that's sometimes what I'm like compelled to do, but I know what I need to do, and what will bring me joy long term is like the dedication to just like a habit. And so for me, the habit is like getting in here and training no matter what. If I'm a little under the weather or I'm injured or whatever, it's like, hey, still get out here, warm up, and then decide if you're going to adjust the training or scrap it altogether if you're really not feeling well. But usually it's like, oh, I feel terrible, I'm freaking tired, whatever. I get in here, I warm up, and I go, I'll still do it. And then I do it, and I feel better for it.
Do you feel like that, the swimming background and the volleyball background when you were younger set you up well for physically where you are now?
Yeah, what's interesting is I think that what's quite cool about CrossFit is that you can leverage a lot of different things and have, pretty high level success. And so what made me kind of realize that was when I was at the 2021 CrossFit Games. we had a dinner and we were sort of set up with like random games athletes, and there are these little cue cards to ask each other questions at the table, like, what's your favorite color? When did you start CrossFit, or why, or whatever? And so one of them was like, what was your prior training background, or physical education, whatever, physical background, and do you think that's helped you in CrossFit? And everyone at the table had something pretty different, and all of them said yes. My instinct was to say sort of, because I see the pitfalls in what I did, and the weaknesses it created, like for example, absolute leg strength in things like the squat and the deadlift, have been something I've struggled with, because it's like you definitely don't get that with swimming, and then with volleyball you get like power and you get like power repeatability, but it's not like you have like super strong hamstrings, right, or a super strong low back, or even glutes. Like it can be I was pretty quad dominated when I jumped. So anyway, so I think you can like leverage a lot of different sports, and then you have to come in and kind of shore up the opposite of that. And I kind of joked about something, it's not a well thought out thesis, but I think a lot of CrossFit athletes that are successful are genetically predisposed to one thing, and in their youth they did the opposite of that.
Okay.
And so it's not like, it's by no stretch a foolproof idea, but the idea there being is like, oh, let's say you're genetically predisposed to be like enduring, like an endurance type athlete, but in your youth you did a lot of high power output, maybe you played like volleyball, or you whatever, maybe you did Olympic weightlifting. And so what's interesting there is, because if you were genetically predisposed to be really explosive, and then you grew up playing like football and powerlifting, it's like you probably would have really excelled in those things, and you never would have stumbled into the CrossFit gym and found that in by your time you're 22. Because at least right now, that's where a lot of the athletes are coming from, is kind of like, failed high school athletes, college athletes like myself, and then, finding their way into CrossFit later. But then also you're sort of, you have the predisposition for one side of the spectrum, but then you're well trained in the other. And so then once you start training the aspect you're predisposed in, then you have like a pretty solid mix of the two. And so I think there's a bit of that in our sport. It's like even someone like Pat, he grew up competing in some gymnastics, but like his build is not meant to be a gymnast, like long arms, a bit taller. So it's like, that's not a gymnast build, but he has that background. So he can that helps him where, and when he competes in CrossFit, like he does quite well on like the ski erg, bit of a taller guy, long arms, but then he has in his back pocket, like, oh, I can do ring muscle ups and rope climbs better than anyone. So that's kind of my but we're starting to see now a lot of the young 20 somethings have just been doing CrossFit for, almost a decade, maybe recreationally, along with like playing baseball or running track or something, but they've just been kind of like sharpening that saw, and they've like maybe competed as a teen, like Dallin Pepper, and then they're 21 and they're like, holy smokes, they're already like really good at this. So it doesn't quite, that theory doesn't quite sing quite as true as it maybe did 5 years ago. But
do you feel like there's with those younger guys coming through that have been doing CrossFit from a very young age, do you feel like there's any sort of, I don't know what the word might be, like risk there, that they haven't, experienced team sports and throwing and catching a ball and all those kinds of things? Or do you feel like it is a good thing?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's a thing, right? I think there's probably, Olympic weightlifters that have just Olympic weightlifted their whole life, and they're going to do that until they're 20, 30, 40 something. And then maybe they'll play rec sports, and maybe they never will. Right. And some of them can catch a ball and some of them probably can't. And it's like, fine. I do think, like, kind of back to my previous point, I think what you might miss out on is just the joy of playing team sports, which I wouldn't trade for anything, for sure. And then also just the amount of opportunity you have to compete in like sort of traditional sports, whether that's, football or whether it's basketball or swimming. I was doing some spring cleaning and cleaning out my closet and getting rid of old medals and stuff. And I would compete in swimming every weekend for, 10 weeks, right? And do 6 races a weekend. So it's just like the amount of times I had to deal with the butterflies and get up there and try to PR and listen to my coach and try and execute that. And, balance between racing the other people, but staying in my own lane. And it's the same with volleyball. We played 60 games in a 3 months span, So it's just like so many. And whereas in CrossFit, the way the sport is set up and it's so young, let's say if that's all you're doing when you're, 13, 14, 15, 16, like you'll be lucky if you get to compete 3 times a year. That's a lot. Actual competitions against people of your age and skill level, and you might do 6 workouts. So that's like 18, 18 times you get to take the floor and deal with that, as opposed to like, 60 in 3 months. So I'm getting like 300, I'm getting almost 200 reps a year or something of like competing, as opposed to 20. So that, I think that's probably, to me, that's like the biggest thing. And just, I think also, if there's like if there's a parent listening to this or a young athlete listening to this, do what you love, right? But also, there's a lot more opportunity in a lot of those traditional sports, right? Like opportunities for scholarships. You can be the 700th best baseball player in America and of your age and get a scholarship, right? Whereas in CrossFit, it's like if you're not the 10th best CrossFitter in the world in your age, you're not going to get a lot of opportunity to compete at a level or compete at all. And certainly not that it's about money. It's about experiences. It's about like living a healthy lifestyle. It's about having fun. It's about learning to win, learning to lose, all that kind of stuff. But if you do want to if you do have some gift and you're really dedicated, it's like, you might as well do something that, you can get a scholarship from, and that's what I did with volleyball. And I'm grateful for that. It helped pay for my education, which is like, and then it just so happened I got good enough at CrossFit that that's my income right now. But, you're always going to have your brain. You're not always going to have your body. So, yeah, I think like, totally okay to play a real sport or traditional sport and do CrossFit on the side and kind of like stay a multi-sport athlete as long as possible. Don't put all your eggs in one basket, because there's only, 10 men and 20 women that are like making a living off of CrossFit, right? And not that, again, that's the be all end all, but then there's thousands and thousands of athletes getting scholarships for traditional sports in the States and in Canada and so on. So just like a numbers game, it kind of makes sense to leverage that a bit.
Yeah. When I talk to elite level athletes on here, I like to talk about mindset, and like HYROX is particularly tough at times. Mm-hmm. Where does your mind go during those tough workouts?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I think everyone leverages something differently for that. That's something I've learned. Like for me, I think about something technical or something like time or number based to kind of like keep me in that, like that zone. Right. And sort of like, don't think about the pain, right? Like it's there and that's fine. And that's, I think of it kind of like expression I use is when you're competing for sure is you're sort of like driving the car and the car might be on fire or overheating. And you're just sort of looking at the knobs and you're like, it's overheating. Would you look at that? Okay, maybe I'll slow down a little bit. Maybe I'll throttle back, bring it down a gear. Or like, oh, what's my miles per hour? Oh, that's a little faster than I'd intended, but I'm not overheating. So let's keep it there for a bit and see what happens, and like in swimming, you could breathe and take a little bit of a longer stroke. This is more in training. And you'd see the clock and you'd be like, I'd be doing math like, oh, okay, that lap took me, 37 seconds. And the one before that was 38. Okay. Like I'm consistent. Or I'd count my strokes per lap and try to, okay, let's get one less stroke this next lap by kicking a little further. So just kind of keeping myself occupied. I'm not out there like thinking about how much I love my family or like do it for them. There's just no space for that for me. Maybe other people do that and it works. Maybe other people say they do that and they're not actually doing it. I don't think I've ever done that. There's no space for it. Sometimes when it gets like really hard, like, if I've done like a VO2 max, I might just kind of like recite something in my head. I don't have like a line, but it might just be like it's supposed to hurt, like believe in yourself, like just something like that, maybe if I just listened to some like Jocko or frickin' what's the other guy, Goggins, maybe just like reciting some line that he says, even if I don't know even what I feel the whole, who's got the boats or who's got the logs or something like that.
Who's going to carry the boats?
Who's going to carry the boats? So I was like, I had a, like some interval thing And at the time, this was like a couple months ago, I just sort of watched some, just some short of him like doing his thing. And I didn't even know what it meant, but it just sounded cool. So I kind of was reciting it in my head because I was just like, okay, it's just like, just keep, one stroke at a time. Like, don't think about the pain. Just keep going until you fail, kind of thing. This was like a death by thing that, you're meant to reach failure. And in those things, it's always frustrating if you finish and you're like, oh, I could have went to one more round, right? If you ever do that. Yeah, I mean, for me, mostly it's like I go into, if I'm competing or in training, really, I go into those things with like a specific plan or a goal in mind. And I just try to like, repeat that in my head. So maybe in training, if I had like, I'm trying to think of a hard workout I had the other day. Yeah, I was like, okay, I want to move technically really well in this movement, but move as fast as I can, no matter how tired I am. And then, rest as much as I need to move on to the next bit. And then like when I finish on the echo bike, like just 100% full send or something like that. And so when I'm in the workout, I'm thinking about those three things, right? It's like, you have to move this as fast as you can, like try to find a way. And you're visualizing and you're thinking like, how can I move this sandbag up and down like faster? Every rep has to be faster than the last, fast, no matter how tight I am, faster. And so just kind of like getting wrapped up in the moment, really, and in the numbers of that moment or in the detail of that moment or something technical of that moment. And then in competition, it's like, really, it's the same thing. It's like trying to focus on the most important thing, and yeah, just getting wrapped up in that. And that works for me. I think for other people, they might not be as like thoughtful or something in their plan as far as like splits. But in HYROX, it's like maybe if you have 3 or 4 laps of like a burpee broad jump, I might you might be looking at the clock every halfway through each lap and be like, okay, like I'm on pace. Come on, don't quit now. Like this is what you train for. Like you wanted to do these burpees in 3 minutes 5 seconds. That means a minute 30 every 2 laps. That means 45 seconds every lap. Like you gotta freaking hold that. And like that's what I would do if I was doing HYROX, is just like keeping an eye on that clock, comparing that to how I'm feeling, and like, yep, like you're there. You just like don't quit now. Get that 305. Like that's what you've wanted. So
yeah. I'm very similar actually in HYROX, especially for the runs. Like you might have to do 2 or 3
right.
or 2.5 laps for a kilometer. So I'm like, okay, that's 1 lap done. That's a minute down, and that kind of thing. I'm constantly doing maths in my head. I sometimes think if people could get an insight into your brain, they'd be like, what's going on? But
yeah,
it helps.
We had a joke like there's this one. It was like this workout was called Gretel, and so you did 3 clean and jerks, 3 burpees for 10 rounds. And it's just like full tilt, workout took like 2.5 minutes. And like the strategy was like, okay, sprint to 4 rounds, then you're halfway done. Because once you get to 8, it's just 2 left. Like stupid, like, gym bro math, right? You're like, you got to sprint to 4 because then you're halfway. And then you sprint to 4 and then, hey, it's just 2 left. You're basically done. Just bring it home. And so that was like the strategy, was do 4 as fast as you can, and then do 4 as fast as you can, and then you just have 2, so you might as well go as fast as you can. So like in that workout, that I wasn't thinking like, oh, 9 more. It's like, no, like 3 more,
Yeah, nice. In the within CrossFit, obviously, like you've been in it many years, do you feel like, aside from you touched on the habits, do you feel like there's anything else mindset wise that is separating some of you top guys from some of those others that don't make it from a mindset perspective?
That's a tough question. It's hard to know. I think something that I do well, and I would say even some athletes that do well or even do better, have better trophy cases than me, I think I do better than them, is I do a really good job of like resetting after each each workout. And just because I think sometimes, and this is partially, I think I realized it's because of how the media and the culture of CrossFit like reports on and portrays the sport. Every workout is, I mean, we know this, but in practice, people don't practice this, I don't think, mentally, is every workout's very different, right? So when I go to a competition, there's going to be some workouts where it's like, I should be able to win this, right? Like this is a good event for me. This needs to be a top finish. If I, like, so for me, when I go to competition, I'm usually trying to podium because it's usually where I can end up if I do well. So it's like, all right, like if I'm going to podium at this competition, like I need to win, for me, it would be a workout with swimming and wall balls and rope climbs. And, it's like, that's a great workout for Brent. Like I got to find a way to win this or come top 3. Because I need those points. Whereas if there's a workout with like heavy deadlifts, strict handstand push-ups, maybe like dips in a vest or something, it's like, okay, like, do your best. Are you going to win this? No, right? Like you're whatever. And so I think what sometimes happens is people know that, like we all know that, but when you're at a competition, you can see the like demeanor of an athlete. They can get really down on themselves. Let's say it's day 1 is finished and they're sitting in like 15th place and they're like, oh man, like 15th. And it's like, yeah, but like those 2 events were bad for you. So relax. And, how good you are at these other things that are going to come up. And this is part of it, is that at the games, we don't know what else is coming up. So it feels like the world is coming to an end when you're 15th and you're 3 workouts in. You're like, man, I was coming in here with big expectations. I wanted to finish like top 5, like podium, whatever. It's like, yeah, but you're going to have like, 9 more events, even though if we don't know what they are, that it's going to balance out. Like there's going to be some stuff that comes down the pipe that's good for you and bad for the people that are 1 through 14, because they just had the stuff that was good for them. So just like, chill and just trust that stuff's coming, and then it comes and you do well. Whoa, yeah, like we're back, baby. And they're riding this roller coaster that's very self-inflicted, because don't get me wrong, like in other sports, so something like, volleyball, it's like every point is the same. Like, yeah, you have slightly different, you're switching positions. So you might have good and bad rotations, or there with a good server and a bad server. But yeah, if you're down, 15-0 at the start of a set, like, yeah, you suck and like you're in trouble. And, that is going to be a roller coaster. If you're able to ride that and get out of it, it's like, yeah, you're going to look back and say the emotions of that set or that match was a roller coaster of emotions. But in CrossFit, you can allow like the nature of the sport to take you on that ride every single time. And that's unnecessary, because the nature of the sport, unless you're Matt Fraser or Claire Toomey, the nature is you are going to have a roller coaster of points, like you're going to have some bad workouts. And so just like taking those in stride, as like, oh, well, would you look at that? There's that event that surely was going to happen where I didn't get as many points as the other events. Like, okay. And then you move on. And that can happen with a bad start. And that's the thing is, again, I'm using the wrong lingo. Oh, I had a slow start and then I really rallied. It's like, you didn't have a slow start. It just so happened that the things you're not good at were programmed at the beginning of the event. If you just say there's 15 events, and sometimes there are, if you just switch those around, everyone would be saying like, man, that guy came out so hot. Holy smokes, he's so good. He's going to win. Oh man, really, really poor finish. Not much of a closer. Hey, like, oh, that guy needs to work on, he must have, been really nervous at the end there. It's like, no, it was just, I mean, that don't get me wrong, that might still happen for some athletes. But I feel like I'm pretty, I try to be pretty stoic about that sort of thing. It's like, hey, I mean, every single workout's different. And a lot of like those roller coaster of the points is largely dependent on the order of the events and the type of the events. And don't get too wrapped up in like the emotions of like seeing those flips and then the rises and the falls of your points total relative to everyone else, because it's like that is going to happen. Like it's the nature of the game. It's like it's inevitable. It's not like other sports. But when the media announces on it, they announce on it like other sports, where it's like, oh, after 2 events, this guy's in the leader's jersey. He's the guy to beat. Look out for him. It's like he's not the guy to beat, and maybe he is, but it's like he just happened to be really good at the first 2 things, and then that person slides to maybe 10th or 5th or 3rd, or maybe wins. It's like, what do you do? Like, that's not so, they're creating that perception in that athlete's mind and everyone else's. And then it's like, it's false, right? It's not really the real story.
Yeah.
That's something I think I do mentally, specifically, that's fairly specific to this sport.
We
But I'm sure there's guys in HYROX where it's like, oh, like this guy we all know is really good at HYROX, but the first two stations are his worst stations.
yeah.
So he's always like, oh, he's coming from behind. It's like he's not really coming from behind, you know? Like it's like his worst two stations are his first two stations, and they always will be. But if you switch the order of the stations every time you did it, then you'd be like, oh man, that guy had a slow finish. He just what a wimp. It's like, no, like his worst two stations are the last two, so everyone caught up to him. But really, that's not the story, right?
Yeah. I've spoken on here with a sports psychologist, Josephine Perry, and she talked about chunking, and it's very applicable in HYROX in that you can chunk one of the essentially 16 stations that you do. Just focus on the one that you're doing now. Just let's get this kilometre run done. Let's get this kilometre ski done, and like without worrying about all the things that have come and all the things that have passed. If you just get that it might even be the next 10 meters done. It can help a lot.
Yeah.
I guess it's a similar thing.
Yeah, just be where your shoes are is something that I heard where Joshua Medcalf say, who's like a sports psychologist type guy who's written some books. It's like, yeah, be where your feet are. And in the case of volleyball, we had something called the reset button, where you'd literally tap the side of your head and it was pretend there was a button there. And the idea was like whatever happened, especially in volleyball, what's interesting about it is, the point ends, and no matter how good or how bad the point was, it's just 1 point, right? It's not a one. In something like football, like gridiron, or even football from a UK perspective, one goal, like one big mistake, can lead to a goal, and you're not scoring many goals. So it's like a pretty big deal. It's like not good to make a big mistake that causes a goal, or maybe you should have had a goal and you flubbed up the free kick or something. But in volleyball, it's like, the game's to whatever, 21, 25. You can, so no matter how badly you messed up, or if you had this awesome point, it was just like gangbusters and you're all celebrating. It's like, okay, well, just 1 point, like reset, and let's just like chunk, like you said. And then like, what's the next job? Like, what do I need to do in this next point to get a point? And so I think I definitely developed that in CrossFit, and that was something that the coaches there really like instilled in me, and I think it's pretty applicable to something I developed in volleyball, but very applicable to CrossFit, where each event, I try to finish a workout, and we have this kind of expression where we go like, that was perfect, like exactly where we need to be is the words that we use now. It's like, oh, that was right where we need to be, like that was like just the right amount of points we squeezed out of that one. Moving on. And even if we're lying to ourselves, it's just like, well, what are we going to do? Sit and talk about how it went bad? Like we can do that on Monday. Like we got stuff to do. We have an hour and a half before the next one. Like let's focus on that one.
Yeah. In HYROX, on the men's side, there's a fairly dominant athlete at the moment, Hunter McIntyre, who won the world championships. He's got the world record. And you mentioned Tia, Claire Toomey, and Matt Fraser in CrossFit, who have been fairly dominant over recent years. Does that affect your mindset at all? When you're thinking about what your goals are and how you approach competitions, obviously you want to win. Do you? I don't know. Are you like, yeah, but Matt Fraser's there? Does that ever come into your mind?
That's a good question. I mean, so he's retired now. So I haven't competed against him since 2020. So it's been a while now. Gosh. Sometimes it feels like not that long ago, but it's 3 years. At the time, like I always, I realize now I couldn't or didn't, but like I felt like I could beat him. I have to be the one that believes that, right? Like hope has to be, if you lose hope, then like, what do you have, kind of? And usually what happens in CrossFit is I kind of, it's like, oh, if you think you have a shot at winning, then you'll probably finish in the top 5. And if your goal is like, oh, I'd like to podium, what you're saying when you're saying you'd like to podium is that you'd like to come 3rd, because you're not good enough for 1st or 2nd, which means you're probably going to finish 7th. You know what I mean? And that's like, that doesn't mean that just saying I want to win, like I guess like for me, I don't really focus on that so much as like, cause like, today I have to do like heavy cleans and I have to do like a bike interval thing. And like me wanting to win isn't what separates me from anyone else. Right. Like it's just, and part of that's my personality. I just think it's kind of bullshit, because it's like, if you went to a competition, any competition, and you said, would you rather finish 1st or 2nd? What are they going to say? Or would you rather finish second or fifth? Or would you rather finish fifth or 28th? Like everyone, you know, like the answer's going to be 100% across the board. So that's not what separates us. It's not our will to win or our desires or even really our goals. It's like, how good are you? And then what are you willing to do to get better? And then what's that balance, right? Because like not everyone is going to win, right? One person's going to win. And so, yeah, I don't think it really affected me that much. I was always just like, well, what can I do with what I have to do as well as I can? And I'm proud of like the skill set I have and the decisions I've made. It's like, you know, there's like a quote from this guy. He's like, oh, I built the best bridge I could build with the materials I had, like with the, you know, with the resources, like an architect, right? He's like, oh, with the money and the resources and the opportunity I had, I built a really good bridge. Like, was it the best bridge ever? Could it have been yeah, you know, but like I built a good bridge. And that's kind of like how I feel about my, like each competition, but also like my career is, you know, I'm going to finish my career. I'm not going to have the same trophy case as Matt Fraser, right? It's just not going to happen. But he doesn't have the same trophy cases. I don't know, Michael Phelps, and Michael Phelps doesn't have as much money as some other athlete, you know, like it's just never ending. So I try to like kind of stay away from that and just more so like focus, like, you know, really chunking. Let's get back to that. You know, when I think back like year to year and week to week and day to day and workout to workout and like, you know, like workouts at competitions, it's like there's very few regrets, and certainly not regrets. I mean, I have regrets, but usually not from a, you know, like I had certain coaches at certain times that I wish I didn't keep for as long, like that sort of stuff, but it was all with the right intention, right? Or like, and, you know, I've made mistakes in workouts where, oh, I should have rested 5 seconds longer or 5 seconds less before, you know, starting the next movement. And that would have maybe got me on the podium one year if I just like, you know, not fallen over in that one handstand walk or something. But like that's sport. I mean, like, you know, even the best basketball players have missed big shots, right? It's not because they didn't try hard, not because they didn't want to put them in. It was just like you just missed them. So I don't know, like I guess circling back to the question of like, you know, the Tias or the Mats, or in the case of someone listening to this, if you're in the HYROX and you're kind of in the mix and you have this like Hunter McIntyre, like kind of like thing hovering over you, like, oh, can I beat him? Like, what does that mean? I think like someone like that is, you know, unbeatable until they're beaten. You know, like it's I think something, especially CrossFit and HYROX being so new, it can be easy for people to like create some mystification of it, like, oh, you know, no one, you know, now that they've done this, it's like no one's ever been beaten once they've won 2 in a row, or like, you know, create some like weird stat for it. And you're like, yeah, but it's been around for like no time at all. And so it hasn't really, you know, and all that's, it's no different than like basketball. Like no team ever came back from 3-1 in the finals until they did. Yeah. You know, Cleveland did it, right? And it seemed impossible. And then they just were like, well, no, like let's do it. Like let's win one game at a time. And so yeah, I think if you're, you know, if you feel like you're facing that, or and you know, even if that's like, oh, no one from this area or my country or someone of my size has ever qualified for the games or the world championships of HYROX, or, you know, like something like that. And you're like, yeah, until they have. And then it'll also, you ever seen the show Succession?
Yes.
The television show?
Yeah.
So like the first really good show, a lot of fun. And the first episode, Logan Roy, who's this mogul, right? Like he's like done everything. One of the richest men in the world. He's an asshole, but also like, you know, just like a enigmatic kind of like personality. And he's describing, he's like, oh, you know, everyone's telling him what to do because they're all like afraid really of like, oh, you know, the world's changing. Like, you know, we need to get into internet. We need to do this and this. And he's kind of like doing something else. And they're like, oh, what are you doing? And he goes, well, he's like, I've been doing this for like 40 years. And he said, back in the 80s, they said news was dead. And then they said, it's all going to VHS. And then they said this, no one's going to go to parks anymore now that we have the internet. But I kept all our theme parks. And guess what? 20 years later, people are still coming to them. And he's like, and now it seems so obvious. You know, everyone, oh, of course. But he's like, at the time, it seemed impossible. And I seemed like the crazy one. And then it worked. And then it seemed so obvious, all these really tough decisions I made. And so I think about that with, you know, like in CrossFit, it's like no one has competed at the games for 10 years and then, or I guess 8 years, and then won in the 9th year. So like someone could tell me, oh, it's impossible that you'd be 33 and win the games. That'd be the oldest games champion ever. And you've done it for too long. Your prime's behind you. You know, when people win, it's always in their first 5 years or whatever. I'm like, yeah, until it isn't. Right. And then all of a sudden, oh, of course, it seems so obvious. Yeah, he was always gonna, he figured it out. His training got better and he matured with age, and the wisdom over youth, and then it'll seem obvious. Yeah. Oh, of course, someone caught up to Hunter. It was only a matter of time. But right now, it's like, oh, it's impossible. But it'll seem obvious when someone does it. Oh, of course. Oh, he probably cheated, or it was. Oh, yeah, you can see his trajectory. It was just up, and he was bound to catch him. But right now, it's no, there's no way. How could he? So I don't know. That's how I see it. It's just like it can be easy to get wrapped up in the now and the voices of like that kind of stuff. But if you went back in time 10 years and told me what I would accomplish, like I wouldn't have believed it. Do you know what I mean? Like, oh, you'll make the games 8 times. I'm like, no one's made the games 8 times. Like that's impossible, right? Like, oh, I'm gonna finish on the podium twice. Like, oh, no one as tall as me can do that. Or like, oh, I'm going to have my own gym and like be a full-time sponsored athlete. I don't even want to do that. Like I want to be an accountant. So it's like, but those things seem obvious now, right? Now it's like, oh, of course that all happened, Brent. Like, you were hardworking and you had all the gifts that you needed. It's like, it wasn't so obvious 10 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't know. That's how I see things. I'm like, when someone asks me like, hey, Brent, maybe they're like 26 or something. Like, I want to make the games in 2 years. What do you recommend? I try to never say, oh, you won't make it. So I'm like, you could, man. Like, it's not going to be easy, and the odds are against you, and you probably won't if you have no athletic background and you just started going into a CrossFit gym. But I'm like, well, this is what you need to do. Train this much, stretch, eat.
Yeah,
maybe.
I should say as well for the people listening. I asked that question not just for the 5 people that want to try and compete with Hunter, but also like within HYROX, you're competing within age groups. You can see everyone's times across the globe. There's a lot of people that are thinking I can never reach the world championships or never reach the top 20 in my age group or anything like that. So it applies to a lot of people listening, not just a few.
I think it applies to everything. It's like, oh, no one in my family has ever went to college. If you have something like that, there's like this, you're placing this barrier based on something like external or like a legacy or like a stats thing or I never go to Harvard. I don't know, whatever it is, right? I'm like, what I always find funny about that is, like I said, it all seems impossible. And then once you do it, it'll seem obvious, and people will forget that they used to think it was impossible. And I think what's funny is when you can't, there's some like little expression about this. I think I saw Josh Bridges post it once, and it was like, oh, they'll say you'll never make it, and then you make it, they'll say it's luck, and then you make it twice and they'll say it's just genetics. Right, or something, and it's like, oh, and then they'll say it's drugs, right, or whatever. It's just there's something else, there's some excuse why they couldn't or why you did, and heaven forbid it was just that you just were deliberate and you just were dedicated and you just found a way eventually to reach your goal. But people, it's just like, you'll kind of, if you want to, you'll hear the voices that say the other thing. Oh, it's impossible. Oh, it was just luck. Oh, they're not really that good. It was just timing. And it was just because this guy didn't do it, he got hurt, and this person this. So then the 10th spot filled in. So you made the world championships, but you weren't really good enough. Then you make it again. You go, well, yeah, I mean, it's just genetics, and you just have all this money because, your parent, and then they'll just keep making up reasons until like, well, maybe I made it. I don't know.
Yeah. I know we're running out of time. I've just got a couple more questions, if that's all right. Is that cool? One is like within CrossFit, you're essentially working towards the games, which is kind of like once a year. I know you have other competitions in between. How do you manage that season, and how do you think about? Do you really keep track of where you think you're at fitness-wise throughout the year and how your training is working and progressing? Or is it like you're just waiting until the games every year and it's like, oh shit, it worked or it didn't, Like, are you... Yeah.
Tough question, especially in our sport, right? Because like, this year you could have spent all year swimming and we didn't swim at the games.
Yeah.
And one thing that's hard in our sport is there's certain things like swimming, like if you do sometimes at the games, once every 2 or 3 years, they'll have a sprinting event like running that's like, under a minute, maybe it's 400 meters or like 100-meter out and back or zigzag. And like we don't have those distances written down anywhere. Like you can look at the thing and try to figure it out. You can do the timing, but it's very like you don't really know if you're fast relative to the rest of the crew until you get there. And you don't know if they've been working on sprinting. And so it's a very, those things, those two specifically, even biking, because the courses aren't like accurately tracked as to the distance and stuff. You're like, am I better at biking relative to the field? Right? Because at the end of the day, you need to be better relative to the field to get points. And then the type of biking we doing changes and we might not bike. So like there's certain things that are really tough. And again, so basically to answer your question in those regards, you literally don't know. Like you create a plan for those things and you say, okay, like I'm not, I'm going to swim once every 2 weeks and then once a week. And this is going to be the periodization of that. And we're going to try and maybe set some specific goals around like, I want to improve my 100-meter time or something like that. But you don't really know if that's going to pay off until the game. Same with the sprinting. But then some of the other stuff, you have more checkpoints for sure. Like if it's more like classic CrossFit, as far as like, lifting a weight repetitively and doing handstand push-ups and handstand walks, like you have touch points for that more frequently. So you have a pretty good idea of where you stack up relative to everyone else. And there's just more data on that. So there's more and more accurate data is probably the better way to put it. So it's like there's open workouts and these semis workouts where you know the layout, you know the distances, you know the weights. It's like, oh, if I can snatch 300 pounds, if I can clean and jerk 360, it's like those are good numbers. Like those are good enough to go to the games. If I can hit that on the day, then I know that I'm going to finish top 5 in both of those kind of thing. So it's kind of dependent a little bit more on like what the workout is. And so really, like if someone's listening to this and they're like, okay, that's all great, Brent, how does that help me? In our sense, like kind of what we do, my coach and I, is really every day, but more so like at the end of the games, it's like, okay, what are we working on for next year? Like what are the big areas of focus that need the most amount of my time on a weekly basis? And then we sort of lay out a plan. So maybe it's running. It's like, okay, well, we're going to do a lot of slow running, like zone 2 running for the first 6 months. And then we're going to blend that so that by the time I get to the game, there's no zone 2 running and it's all like threshold and like speed work, and so you're accumulating volume, you're building an aerobic base, and then you're transitioning that into like workout speed, right? Like that'd be the simplest way to put, like, that is our running plan. And then you might do that for weightlifting as well, where it's like, okay, like why, like what are my worst 1 rep maxes? There's about 10 different things you could do with a barbell that would be a 1 rep max. Let's pick the ones that are probably my least competitive. How do we get those up? Maybe talk to a weightlifting coach and make a plan where it's like, okay, I'm weightlifting 2 times, 3 times, maybe 4 times a week, depending on how bad it is. And like, this is the plan that I'm going to do. And it'll put 20 pounds on my snatch, or there's no way I'd put that much on my snatch. Let's say it's like, all right, we just want to put like 10, 15 pounds on my back squat. Let's say, so it's kind of like that for each problem. And you sort of create a season plan, but then obviously there's interruptions to that, whether that's Rogue Invitational or Wadapalooza, the open quarter semis. And so you have to like balance that as well. And for certain athletes, if they're smart, their goal is the semis, right? It's like, I just need to make the games again, or I just need to make semis. So my goal is to periodize and plan for quarters. And so if you're planning for quarterfinals, which is online, it's like, you're not swimming, right? You're not, there's a lot of things you don't have to do, but you have to be really good at rope climbs, GHD sit-ups, heavy barbell burpees, like the things that they're going to have in your gym. So I think hopefully that kind of answers it.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And just one more question I wanted to ask before you go is that you do some work with the PFAA in CrossFit that I think you've been heavily involved in setting up, right? Can I just ask, 2 minutes, like what you do in that, how you feel it's helped the sport, purely because at some point, presumably, people are going to want to set up something similar, perhaps in HYROX. So how you've gone about setting it up, do you think it's a good thing to have in all sports? And anything else you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, gosh, there's a lot to cover. I think we've had a net positive effect, and it's one of those things, like, I'd always wish that we could have done more already, but at the same time, we've done more than anyone else as far as like trying to represent athletes' interests, right? And just there's a reason that in every major sport there's, you know, players associations or unions and stuff, because if they don't look out for their interests, no one will, right? It's you know, you have to look out for them, because it's not even that you know, let's say competition organizers or, you know, teams and team sports are like malicious by nature, but they're looking out for their own interests, and a lot of times athletes become disposable, right? And you're just like, oh well, if you don't like it, someone else will come along, right? That's just kind of the like, oh, you know, and then sometimes there's just a lack of education and understanding, because a lot of the people that are running events or owning teams, like, they were never athletes, and so they don't have the perspective of like, well, this specific rule or this specific thing like isn't fair, and we don't, or it's not fair, or we don't feel it's safe, or it's not reasonable, or there's a better way that would, you know, that we would all just, we would like this changed. And then obviously there's the financial component, where it's like, oh, you know, athletes are just, they just want a bigger piece of the pie, right? More athletes getting more pieces of the pie. So yeah, I think like there's so much to talk about there. But you know, we're working on.
Sorry,
Yeah.
from a like practical perspective, what have you done to set it up? Have you, you know, have you led the charge? Have you brought together the athletes? Are you the voice of those? Are you surveying those? How does that work?
Oh man, so I mean, you know, we're incorporated as a nonprofit, so you know, we incorporated. You know, we did some research. We did this in the summer of 2020. You know, so we're a nonprofit company associated in or incorporated in the state of Washington in the US, set up in a similar way that other, you know, associations are set up, like players unions and stuff like that. We're back. And then, yeah, I mean, it's kind of sport dependent. What's tough, obviously, with CrossFit is like there's not a really strong definition of who is like a pro and who is not, because any given year you could just do the open and then all of a sudden you're in. And so we have rules regarding who gets to vote. And then, you know, the people that vote get to vote in a board of directors, and the board of directors have like, you know, a mission statement as to like improving the conditions at competitions, both like on the floor, but then financially as well. And then, yeah, I mean, it's really like, we're just trying to, you know, we've kind of evolved over the last few years. I don't want to talk, I realize I'm talking a bit like a politician, but we're trying to just like, you know, what's the best bang for our time? Like, what are the things we can do that will like specifically impact athletes in the best way possible using the limited time and money resources that we have, right? And then finding ways to, you know, get that done, whether that's like through athlete participation or through like lobbying or just like convincing competitions to change based on the, you know, just like, hey, this is just a good idea. Do you want to just do this? It's very like, so for something like HYROX, it's like, yeah, you probably want to, really what you need is you need the support of the best athletes, right? Like that's a big part of it. If you want to, the bigger the change you want to make, the more support from the biggest athletes that you need. You know, ideally you want to know like, okay, what are we trying to change? And that could be anything from, you know, just like rule changes or schedule changes or, you know, monetary changes, you know, broadcasting maybe the rights to use your name and image and likeness, just things like that. And, you know, it's about, you know, finding a way to, usually if you get the best athletes, kind of the rest will follow. And usually what more or less what is going to benefit the best athletes is more or less going to benefit everyone to a certain extent. Like there's exceptions to that, but especially when you're looking at like safety and fairness, they're probably going to know because they have the most experience and they're the most invested in the sport being safe, in the sport being fair. They're going to understand the little nuances of like, hey, this rule doesn't really work. You know, like we've seen it not work repeatedly. This is what we think it should be. And, you know, that athlete perspective and voice is kind of unique in that, like, you don't really understand that until you're on the floor, right? Like, there's no way to really, like, I don't really understand what's going on for those football players because I'm like, I'm looking from up here, right? Like, it's different on the pitch, right? I don't know if that answers your question or not. But.
No, it does. That's great. Thank you. Yeah. This has been brilliant. I really appreciate your time. If we can just have one last question, if you could put a message out to the world on a billboard for the whole world to see, what would it say?
Yeah, you know, it's funny. I think I heard someone ask this on a different podcast, and I'm trying to remember, this was like 2 years ago, and I was like, oh, what would I answer? So now I think it's not going to be that coherent or punchy. It'd be something to the effect of like, I don't know, like be yourself or follow your heart or something like that. I just think that I wish that I had really like, I'm glad that when I have things go well when you follow your kind of your instincts about who you are, right? Like I'm a kind of a nerd, like I'm very numbers driven and that sort of stuff. And whenever I've like shied away from that or felt like that's like wrong or I shouldn't be doing that, I'm out of my groove and I'm not as successful in whatever you define as success. I was not as successful. And when I feel like I follow more of those instincts, and not to say that you shouldn't learn and try to, improve on yourself as well. But, I've been like that since I was playing with action figures, like I've just always been very like detailed. And so I think, you know, like really trying to better understand like who am I, like what really fills me up, what brings me joy, not necessarily from like a structural like, oh, like playing with cars brings me joy, or fixing cars. It's like, well, yeah, it's cars, but like why? Is it using your hands? Is it understanding how the entire system works and then going down to a little small bit? Is it the colors? Is it the beauty of it? Like there's going to be different reasons why certain people gravitate towards working with cars. So like understanding that and then trying to like, leverage that strength to whatever it is in your life, whether that's in a relationship with a person or friends or, a girl or, in your job or in your hobby or whatever that is. And like, just like kind of like framing everything through that, that kind of like fills you up and makes you feel satisfied and makes you excited to do stuff, I think is a good thing. That'd be my tip of the day. That'd be my billboard. Again, I don't know exactly how I'd write that, but like figure out who you are, figure out what like fills you up, and then try to do more of that, and try whatever you are doing, try to like kind of adjust it so that it fits into that.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Love it. All right. Brilliant. Yeah, like I say, really, really appreciate this. If people want to find out more about you, follow you, I know you're doing you've got your professor project as well. Where should they go?
Yeah. So follow me on Instagram at Fikoski. And then I've got 2 training programs. So I've got at Train Your Weakness, which is on Instagram, or trainyourweakness.com. And those are like short, kind of punchy programs where it's just like if you want to get your first bar muscle up, like 6 weeks, just like kind of 30 minutes a day, or get your first double unders or your handstand walk or improve your snatch, kind of like simplified programs. And then the professor project is more like robust, like CrossFit programming. And it's like what I'm doing every day, along with like a condensed kind of 60 minutes a day version. So if you want programming, if you're in your gym or your home gym or a local gym and you want to, see what I'm up to and train with me essentially, then that's what you can get there. And also a ton of video content as well on like some technical things and some strategic things, and like, documents on how to prepare for your competition, kind of like getting into the nitty gritty. There's some of that too, but definitely, just programming. Follow me on Instagram, Professor Project, and Train Your Weakness. So those are my plugs. And drink Ascent protein. Yeah.
Okay. I'll add in as well. I think you've got a wall ball program as well, haven't you? In Train Your Weaknesses, that's probably relevant to people listening. Yeah.
So for HYROX, I think it's just improve your wall balls. And what's interesting about wall balls is, there's like a bunch of different ways to tackle the same problem. Like for a lot of people, it's just like, oh, your squat is maybe weak, or your squat mechanics are just poor because you just are like unfamiliar with the position or your flexibility, or maybe it's a power output, like a driving from the hips to the extremity, or there's like so many different reasons. And so tried to cover like different drills and all of those, as well as just doing wall balls, to hopefully like get people to understand like why do I need to work on wall balls, and what's the like key area that's going to help me improve them. So
okay. All right, perfect. Yeah, thanks so much, and good luck with everything in the future. All right.
Thank you, appreciate it.